Edmund Rice International, the team here in Geneva consists of 4 Christian brothers. Brian Bond, who's not present this evening, is on his way to Australia for home leave. He's the executive director of Edmund Rice International. Kevin Mullen from Ireland, Tino D'Abreu from India, and myself, Terry Dowling, from South Africa. I'm the newest member. I only arrived in January, so I am learning just as much like everybody else is going to learn this evening. Our community house is in Gaillard in France, which is about 200 meters from the border with Switzerland. And we're about a 35-minute journey from our office in Geneva. We also have Brother Kevin Corley, who works with the United Nations in New York. And he is also part of the Edmund Rice International team. So Edmund Rice International is supported by 2 religious congregations founded by Blessed Edmund Rice, the Christian Brothers and the Presentation Brothers. Now I'm going to give you a brief history of how Edmund Rice International kind of came into existence. Sorry, we need to kind of move this on. I don't know why it's not going on. There we go. So in 2002, the Christian Brothers chapter took the decision to move to prophetic action through advocacy and works for justice. And in 2005, the Presentation Brothers Congregation chapter took the decision, we will engage in advocacy work with policymakers on behalf of people who are made poor. Then in 2005, an Edmund Rice International board was appointed, and Edmund Rice International was registered as a public body in Ireland. In 2005, an Edmund Rice team was appointed, and we based our operations in the Franciscan International Office in Geneva. In 2011, Edmund Rice International became an NGO with consultative status with the United Nations. And in 2013, it gained public charity status in Ireland. And in 2014, the congregation chapter of the Christian Brothers gave further support to engage in advocacy with the voiceless, the marginalized, and all that are oppressed. So that just gives you a brief history of how Edmund Rice International came into existence and where we are at the moment. Edmund Rice International works with other partners in the Franciscan International Office. The main group is Franciscan International. These are all faith-based organizations with NGO status at the United Nations. Another group is FMI, the Marist Brothers International. Another group is Vivat International. And then we also have Dominican International and Good Shepherd International in our office space. We also partner with our co-workers in about 30 countries around the world, where the 2 congregations, the Christian Brothers and the Presentation Brothers, work. So, to go on a bit further, so Edmund Rice International is a faith-based non-governmental organization, NGO, based in Geneva and New York, and engaged in advocacy and human rights. And we focus on mainly 3 things: the right of children, the rights of children, the rights to education, and care of the earth and our common home. And we focus very much on young people marginalized as a result of many, many issues. And we can list a few here, like lack of access to education, poverty and disabilities, lack of legal status through human trafficking, early childhood marriage, early childhood issues, etc., etc. Other things that can cause people to be marginalized would be environmental degradation and care of the earth, And we also have concerns for rights of indigenous peoples, rights of asylum seekers and refugees. Another word could be homelessness also, and the rights of people with disabilities, and any other issues that our partners in all the countries that we work in with the Christian Brothers and the Presentation Brothers might be interested in, and they raise with us. We would advocate for those at the United Nations. So that gives you a brief history and status of Edmund Rice International. And the last slide just gives you a picture of all the countries we are involved in around the world. So thank you for listening to that. I'm now going to hand you back to Tino, and he'll carry on with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. And so I will be taking you through the first part of today's presentation. And my name is Tino D'Abreu, and I belong to the Indian province of the Christian Brothers. And I will be soon completing 5 years as part of the ERI team here in Geneva on the 2nd of April. We're going to start with the word advocacy. It is an action word. When I say the word advocacy, what image or thought comes to your mind? Now I'm going to introduce another action word, charity. Again, what image or thought comes to your mind? Which word can you connect with better? Before I came to Geneva, charity was the word I could connect with better. I understood better what a charity or service response to a need like hunger was. When I was based in Dum Dum in Kolkata, India, the brothers organized every evening a packed meal for the homeless who lived on the street outside our walls. More than 75 people gathered every evening to collect their packed meal and satisfy their hunger. This was our charity or service response to their need. I am now going to give you 30 seconds to think of a charity response from your experience. It could be something you did as an individual or do as an individual or as a group, or you are aware of someone else doing. So you have 30 seconds to think of such a charity response. Thank you. As we go through our session today, please keep coming back to that experience. As we talk about human rights, advocacy, charity, the UN, keep that experience at the back of your mind and keep processing all that we are saying through that and other such experiences. Now let's try and understand advocacy. To do this, let's ask, what is the difference between an advocacy response to a need or an issue and a charity response? To help us, we're going to listen to Brother Brian Bond, the Executive Director of ERI, At the moment, he's somewhere over Australia, hopefully getting ready to land in Melbourne and take a well-deserved holiday. So he will not be joining us live, but he has recorded a video statement. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we deliver video statements at the UN. At the Human Rights Council. So he's going to share his experience of responding to a need through a video statement. So I'm now going to play that video statement. And so I'll just share my screen.
So I want to clarify what we mean by an advocacy or a justice response as opposed to a charity or a service response. And I'll do that by recounting my experience of working with students from our schools in Melbourne some years ago before I came to Geneva in what we call a street retreat. So I would take a group of students to a local parish where we would link up with volunteers from the St Vincent de Paul Society who conducted a soup van where they distributed unsold food collected from local shops, prepared soup, and then drove a van to a pre-arranged location where the food was distributed to homeless people, people living on the streets or in cheap boarding houses. At the end of that experience, we would have a debrief where the students shared and reflected on their experience. Students felt positive about their experience, as we all do when we do something good for others. But I would point out that whilst it was good and important that food and conversation had been provided for those who needed it, nothing had changed. And when the students returned home to their warm bed, their mother's cooking, those people would still be there tomorrow, the next week, the next month, probably the next year. And all of that leads to the why question. Why, in an affluent society like Australia, are people forced to live on the streets? What does it say about the way society cares for people who are suffering from mental illness? The conversation soon revealed that a number of those people we met were suffering from some form of a mental illness. So asking why is the first step in advocacy, which aims to address the underlying causes of injustice. And how do we address those causes? By speaking to those who have the power to make change. Or better still, by empowering those affected to speak up for themselves. Usually advocacy is directed at governments, perhaps multinational businesses. For example, I recently joined a campaign and emailed directors of a Korean bank urging them to reject the financing of a proposed new coal mining project in Australia. Advocacy can take the form of letter writing, signing petitions, in-person lobbying,
I'm sorry, I had an issue over there with the sharing of the screen. Okay, so I don't think you got the last part of the video, or did you, Kevin? Did you get the?
It was almost at the end.
It was almost at the end. Okay, all right. Then I'll carry on from there. Okay, and. Okay, I'm sorry about that. We had that same issue this morning also, and I haven't worked out why it happened. I was just hoping it wouldn't happen today. But Brian finished by saying we need to ask questions. Okay, it's not just enough to make a charity response. We need to ask questions as to why that issue, why is that issue is existing? For example, why does homelessness, the question he was asking was, why does homelessness exist in an affluent society like Australia? And who should be responsible for looking into that and taking care of it? So I'm once again going to share my screen, and I hope I don't run into issues this time. Okay. Okay, no, I am running into issues. You can't see this. Okay. Okay, now you can see it. All right, so this is the first slide. So so what's the difference? We said, what's the difference between a charity response and a justice or an advocacy response? The charity response, like the one that Brian and I spoke about, okay, provides direct services like food, clothing, and shelter. While an advocacy response promotes social change in institutions or political structures. Now, I'm not making a case either or. It's not either charity or advocacy. But I would like to stress that both charity and advocacy are important. Both responses are important. And the case I'm making really is that they can both go together. Charity responds to immediate needs and looks for immediate solutions, while advocacy responds to long-term needs and looks for long-term solutions. I invite you once again to please bring back to mind your experience of a charity response. In the example I shared, the brothers in Dum Dum were responding to an immediate need and providing an evening meal to 60 or 70 people every day. But this has been happening for years and is still happening. So while continuing the charity response, how can we now look at an advocacy response? What are the questions that we need to ask? While charity is directed at the effects of injustice, its symptoms, addresses problems that already exist. However, advocacy, on the other hand, is directed at the root causes of social problems and addresses the underlying structures or causes of these problems. This is where asking the why or the what question comes in so important. It helps us to identify the root causes of the issue and then helps me to identify how I can now begin addressing the long-term needs with an advocacy response. Charity is often about private individual acts. Advocacy, on the other hand, is more effective with public collective actions. I'm just going to pause over here for a while, another 30 seconds, and ask you once again to bring to mind your charity response to a particular need or issue. And now focus on not the charity response, but on the need that it was responding to, or the issue. And what question can you now ask of that need or issue that will help you to identify one of the root causes to that need? So I'm giving you 30 seconds to do that. Okay, thank you. Charity calms things down. Advocacy stirs things up. We know from current and recent examples in places like Myanmar, Hong Kong, and Belarus, when demands for human rights challenge those in power, those who have an interest in preserving their privileged position can respond with repression and violence. We are watching live the consequences of the war in Ukraine, how the human rights and lives of ordinary people in Ukraine in today's day and age are being crushed and trampled upon. But for many of us, that is far away. Let's come closer to home. Try and recall, I'm sure you can recall, current examples of threats and violence perpetrated on those who speak up for human rights or condemn injustice. Jesus himself challenged the system in Israel of his time. He overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple that he saw as exploiting people. He condemned the Pharisees and the religious leaders as hypocrites, false guides. A stand that was ultimately to cost him his life. So when we're talking about stirring things up, as we see in many of the hotspots of our world today, it can be very dangerous also. At the moment, I'm not inviting you to something like that. However, with that particular need or issue that is at the back of your mind, I am challenging you to step a little bit out of your comfort zone and see what could be the next step. The first step is to ask questions, and then those will hopefully show us where solutions could be explored. Here's a quotation which I'd like to end with from Helder Camara, former Archbishop of Brazil. And he says, "When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why the poor are hungry, they call me a communist." So I'm going to leave you with that quotation.